There was a time in my life when I viewed funerals very differently than I do now. I didn't see them as sacred spaces of mourning. I saw them as emotionally open environments. And in the world I used to move in, emotional openness was never ignored. It was studied, it was observed, it was understood. Because when people are grieving, their defenses are down, their thoughts are softer, their sense of stability is shaken, and shaken people are more suggestible than they realize. Let me be very careful with what I say next. I am not here to tell you that funerals are secretly evil. They are not. They are moments of love, remembrance, and closure. But I am here to tell you something that shocked me after I left my former life. Grief makes people spiritually vulnerable, not because something supernatural happens at funerals, but because intense emotion temporarily weakens discernment. When someone you love passes, your mind searches for meaning. You replay memories. You question timing. You revisit regrets. You become more reflective than usual. And in that reflective state, your interpretation of events becomes heightened. In my former circles, we understood something simple. If you want to influence someone, wait until they are emotionally destabilized, not to attack them, but because their guard is lower. After I left that world and began seeing things clearly, I realized how easily grief can blur perception, not spiritually, psychologically. And if you've ever left a funeral feeling heavier than expected, more anxious, more unsettled, you may have experienced that vulnerability without understanding it. In this message, I'm going to share what I learned about grief, emotional openness, and why funerals can feel spiritually intense, without fear, without superstition, but with clarity. Because understanding removes panic. And panic is what keeps people confused. Stay with me. What I'm about to explain may completely change how you process loss and protect your peace during one of life's most sensitive moments. When I was involved in the occult, we were taught something very simple about human nature. Heightened emotion amplifies perception. That's it. No mystery, no hidden ritual in the air, no secret activity happening in the background, just psychology. At funerals, emotion is concentrated. Grief, regret, love, shock, nostalgia, all of it fills the room at once. And when emotion rises, your senses become more alert. You notice small details more intensely. You replay conversations more vividly. You interpret silence more deeply. And that intensity can feel spiritual. But intensity does not automatically mean something supernatural is happening. It means your nervous system is activated. When someone dies, your brain confronts something it tries to avoid daily: mortality, finality, the fragility of time. That confrontation creates weight, and weight feels heavy. In my former life, that heaviness was often misinterpreted. People would say, the atmosphere shifted, or something followed me home, or I felt something attached to me. But when I stepped away and studied grief honestly, I saw something else. Grief lingers because attachment lingers. When you love someone deeply, your routines, memories, and identity are partially woven around them. When they're gone, your mind struggles to adjust. So you feel their absence everywhere. You think about them at night. You imagine their voice. You replay old moments. And that lingering presence can feel external, but often it is internal processing. Let me say something important. If you leave a funeral feeling drained, anxious, or emotionally heavy, it doesn't mean something dark touched you. It means your body and mind processed intense emotion. Crowded rooms, crying, long conversations, suppressed tears, all of that is exhausting. Emotional energy is real in the sense that empathy requires output. When you comfort others, listen to stories, and suppress your own tears to stay strong, you are expending mental strength. Afterward, your system crashes. And without understanding that, people assign mystical explanations. In my old life, misunderstanding emotion created fear. Now I see clearly. Funerals feel spiritually heavy because grief is heavy, and heavy things require recovery. In the next chapter, I'm going to explain the real danger surrounding funerals, and it has nothing to do with spirits and everything to do with suggestion. Here is the part that truly shocked me after I left my former life. The real vulnerability at funerals is not supernatural. It is suggestibility. When someone is grieving, their mind is searching for meaning. Loss disrupts your sense of order. And when order is disrupted, the brain urgently tries to restore it. Why did this happen? Could it have been prevented? Was there a sign? Was there a warning? Your mind becomes open to answers. And in that openness, suggestion carries more weight than usual. In the circles I once moved in, this was understood clearly, not in a dramatic ritualistic way, but in a psychological way. When a person is emotionally shaken, even a casual comment can plant a deep interpretation. Someone says, "I felt something strange in that room." Now 3 other people begin scanning their own memory of the room. Someone says, "Ever since the funeral, I felt off." Now others begin questioning their own fatigue. Suggestion spreads quietly. And because grief lowers certainty, people absorb interpretations more easily. Let me be clear, I am not saying people are intentionally manipulating others at funerals. Most are simply processing their own feelings out loud. But when multiple grieving individuals begin reinforcing fear-based interpretations, anxiety can multiply. You walk in emotionally vulnerable. You leave emotionally amplified. I remember attending a funeral years ago where several people kept discussing signs, omens, and mysterious feelings. The conversation escalated. Every coincidence became symbolic. Every sensation became significant. By the end of the evening, the atmosphere felt tense. not because anything supernatural happened, but because collective anxiety fed itself. Grief plus suggestion equals intensity, and intensity, when misinterpreted, becomes fear. Here's what I learned. Your brain, when stressed, is highly pattern seeking. It looks for meaning in randomness. It connects dots that may not need connecting. And when surrounded by emotionally charged conversations, your mind can borrow other people's interpretations without realizing it. This is why awareness is protective. If you feel unsettled after a funeral, pause before assigning meaning. Ask yourself, am I physically exhausted? Am I emotionally overloaded? Did someone else's interpretation influence how I'm feeling? Often, the heaviness fades once you rest, hydrate, and step back into normal routine. Because what felt spiritual was emotional overflow. In my former life, we misunderstood suggestion as spiritual influence. Now I understand something simpler. Grieving people influence each other emotionally, and emotional influence feels powerful when you don't recognize it. In the next chapter, I will share the second hidden vulnerability at funerals, and it has everything to do with unresolved guilt. There is another vulnerability that surfaces at funerals, and this one runs deeper than suggestion. It's regret. Funerals force you to confront unfinished conversations, words you meant to say, apologies you delayed, appreciation you assumed they already knew. When someone passes, time closes, and closure without completion creates emotional turbulence. In my former life, this turbulence was often misinterpreted as spiritual unrest. People would say, they're not at peace, or something feels unfinished in the air. But what actually feels unfinished is internal. When guilt surfaces, it can feel external because it presses heavily on your conscience. You replay your last interaction. You analyze your tone. You revisit small disagreements that once seemed insignificant. And suddenly those memories feel enormous. Grief magnifies everything, especially regret. Let me say something gently but clearly. If you leave a funeral feeling unsettled, it does not mean something is spiritually attached to you. It often means something emotionally unresolved is rising to the surface. Your mind is trying to process unfinished business, and processing feels uncomfortable. In my own life, I attended a funeral where I carried private guilt. I had distanced myself from that person in their final year. Nothing dramatic, just business, just life. But standing there, listening to stories about their kindness, I felt a heavy wave of regret. At the time, I would have interpreted that heaviness as atmosphere. Now I recognize it as conscience. Regret demands reflection, and reflection demands growth. Here's what grief often does. It exposes how fragile time really is. It reminds you that conversations should not be postponed indefinitely. It awakens urgency, and that urgency can feel overwhelming. But it's not dangerous, it's clarifying. Funerals don't create regret, They reveal it. And revelation can either crush you or mature you. Instead of asking, "Why do I feel something strange?" ask, "Is there something I need to release? Is there forgiveness I need to extend to myself or others? Is there a conversation I should stop postponing with someone still alive?" Sometimes funerals are not about the dead teaching us something mystical. They are about the living being reminded of responsibility. Grief shakes you, regret sharpens you, and awareness invites change. In the next chapter, I'm going to bring this all together and explain the truth about funerals that truly shocked me after leaving the occult mindset. When I finally stepped away from the occult mindset, I expected dramatic revelations. I expected to uncover hidden rituals, secret manipulations, dark agendas surrounding sacred moments like funerals. Instead, what shocked me most was this: the power was never in the event, it was in interpretation. Funerals are not spiritually dangerous spaces, they are emotionally intense spaces, and intensity, when misunderstood, becomes fear. In my former life, we over-spiritualized everything. Every atmosphere shift meant something. Every coincidence had a hidden layer. Every emotional reaction was interpreted as external influence. But once I began rebuilding my understanding through truth and maturity, I saw something simpler and stronger. Human beings are deeply emotional creatures. When grief rises, it shakes identity. It shakes routine. It shakes certainty. And when certainty shakes, people look for explanations. If the explanation is fear-based, fear grows. If the explanation is grounded and mature, clarity grows. The real truth about funerals that shocked me was not that something dark happens there. It was that grief makes people temporarily fragile, and fragile people need comfort, not superstition. They need rest, not panic. They need community, not conspiracy. I used to walk into funerals analyzing the atmosphere. Now I walk in with empathy. I used to interpret heaviness as something external. Now I recognize heaviness as love adjusting to absence. That shift changed everything, because once you understand grief properly, you stop fighting shadows. You start caring for your own heart. You hydrate. You sleep. You talk honestly. You allow tears without shame. And suddenly, what felt mysterious becomes manageable. Let me say this clearly to you. If you've ever left a funeral feeling unsettled, anxious, or spiritually confused, pause before assuming something followed you home. Ask yourself, am I exhausted? Am I overwhelmed? Did this loss trigger unresolved emotion in me? Most of the time, the answer is yes, and yes is human. The occult world thrives on over-interpretation. Maturity thrives on discernment. Discernment separates emotional intensity from imagined threat. And once you learn that separation, you become stable in moments that once felt frightening. The greatest protection you can carry into any emotionally charged environment is clarity, not fear, not suspicion, clarity. Funerals are reminders of how temporary life is. They are invitations to love better while you still can. They are mirrors that reflect what matters most. That is not something to fear. That is something to respect. I was a witch once. I interpreted everything through suspicion and symbolism. Now I see something more powerful. Peace comes from understanding, and when you understand your own emotional responses, no atmosphere can control you. Grief will still feel heavy, tears will still fall, memories will still ache, but fear will not own you, because clarity always dismantles it. And that is the truth that truly shocked me.